The Dark Souls Trilogy, which was produced by From Software, contains some of the most lethal and hostile foes ever seen in a computer game. At least in terms of high-profile current games, the bosses that are most dominant and powerful over the entirety of the Dark Souls Trilogy are also among the most difficult bosses in gaming. Even if you ignore the bosses in Demon's Souls, Bloodborne and Sekiro, the Dark Souls Trilogy will be more than enough to test the patience of even the most seasoned gamer. If someone is going up against the boss for the first time, having information about their exploits and patterns is not gonna be of much use. However, it is important to remember that most bosses have these. In Dark Souls, there are bosses that are objectively more challenging than others, and there are also instances in which the difficulty of a battle changes depending on the character build of the player. Magic users have the potential to fully demolish the majority of bosses in some situations, while melee fighters will be more effective against others. At number 28, we have the Silent Demon from Dark Souls. The Silent Demon is the very first boss that you will face in Dark Souls. He is also the very last adversary that you will face throughout the game's tutorial. Veteran players who have experienced a large number of games that are similar to Souls may not find it difficult to defeat this demon, while players who are just beginning their journey through the Dark Souls may have a difficult time defeating him. The activities carried out by the Witch of Izalith have led to the manifestation of the Silent Demon. She used the Lord Soul in an effort to recreate the first flame, but inadvertently unleashed a horde of demons, one of whom turned out to be this boss. At number 27, we have Ceaseless Discharge from Dark Souls. The Ceaseless Discharge boss fight may be easily avoided by going all the way to the end of the arena. This is the easiest way to cheese the fight. Players who aren't familiar with the strategy, on the other hand, will have to contend with a boss fight that is both challenging and aggravating. The Ceaseless Discharge was the youngest of the Witch of Izalith's children and the only son she had ever had. Because of this mother's irresponsible behavior, he mutated into a horrible beast, which many people believe to be the very first demon to ever live in the realm of Dark Souls. At number 26, we have Sin from Dark Souls 2. Every encounter with a dragon in Dark Souls 2 has the potential to be difficult, and the boss fight with Sin is no exception. The player will have a tough time dealing with this dragon since it uses its powerful fire attacks in combination with its various sweeping and lunging attacks. Crown of the Sunken King downloadable content for Dark Souls 2 has him as the game's last boss, which is appropriately given the dragon's degree of challenge. People in Shulva used to worship him, but that all changed when Sir Jorg and the Drakeblood Knights attempted to steal his birth for their own evil purposes. Since then, things have gone from bad to worse for him. Because of this, Sin went into a rage and expelled all of the toxins from his body, which ultimately resulted in Shulva being submerged in a poisonous sludge. At number 25, we have Champion Gundyr, Dark Souls 3. Even if Udex Gundyr is a respectable initial boss with which they begin the experience of playing Dark Souls 3, there are a lot of fans who believe that this fantastic character needs to be given more attention and focus throughout the game. Players' prayers were finally granted when they came across Champion Gundyr in a side quest that could be skipped, and the experience was every bit as magnificent as the gamers had hoped it would be. The battle is difficult because Gundyr is more agile than it was in the previous encounter and uses a variety of devastating attacks to confuse and distract the player. Gundyr was also a chosen warrior like the Ashen One, but he arrived at the Firelink Shrine too late to participate in the ceremony. It had been a long time since the Firekeeper had been seen, and there was no fire left to guard. As a direct consequence of this, Gundyr evolved into a fierce combatant who served as a stern trial for everyone who set out on a mission to preserve the Earth. At number 24, we have the Sanctuary Guardian, Dark Souls 1. Artorias of the Abyss is a fantastic piece of DLC for the first Dark Souls game, and if gamers want to get the most out of their time spent with the Dark Souls series, they should check it out. Players who are interested in investigating the contents of this downloadable content must first engage in combat with the formidable Sanctuary Guardian, since From Software is a master at developing incredible DLCs. This fight is a difficult one due to the fact that the creature that resembles a chimera will leap across the arena and hit the player with a series of attacks that deal a lot of damage. Although it requires some patience, at this time in the game, players will have a good understanding of how the game's combat system works. This enables the player to engage in direct combat with his formidable adversary. Nonetheless, extreme caution is suggested in any case. This beast stands sentry at the entrance of the Ulasil Sanctuary, brandishing its fans at anyone who dares to enter its holy space without permission. Number 23, the Abyss Watchers, Dark Souls 3. One of the Lords of Cinder that the player needs to vanquish in order to open the way to the game's final enemy, the Abyss Watchers, provides the players with one of the most interesting and varied challenges throughout the entirety of the game. The first phase demonstrates how all of these combatants have lost any semblance of sanity, which is par for the course of most of the characters in Dark Souls, and are now engaged in a hopeless struggle to see who will emerge victorious. Nevertheless, the second phase is when most of the action takes place, figuratively speaking. The primary Watcher has the ability to take on the powers of his fellows and augments his assault with fire damage. On top of this, the Watcher becomes ever more hostile, making for an exciting climax to one of the most challenging boss battles in Dark Souls 3 overall campaign. The Abyss Walkers are a group of warriors that styled themselves after Artorias and even consumed wolf blood in order to obtain the soul of the Abyss Walker himself. They were assembled to face the impending danger posed by the Abyss. Artorias served as their inspiration. After connecting the flame, the Watchers had nothing else to live for, and as a result, they gradually succumbed to the Abyss' ever-increasing grip and lost their minds. At number 22, we have Aldrich, Devourer of Gods, Dark Souls 3. Aldrich, Devourer of Gods, is a boss that presents an exceptionally difficult challenge due to the fact that it uses both magic and melee attacks. This deformed beast appears very horrible while it is engaged in combat, which is not helpful at all. This encounter presents a number of obstacles, the most significant of which being that Aldrich deals damage in two different ways, with fire and with magic. Because of this, he poses a significant danger to anyone whose build does not afford them a significant amount of defense against either type of attack. Having saying that, the Lord of Cinder does have a few vulnerabilities of his own. Aldrich was a perverted ex-cleric who was able to harness the powers of the deep without going entirely insane. He was a cruel monster who consumed humans in order to fuel his own arrogance. Aldrich was a horrible person. During the boss fight, he ultimately overcame Gwendolyn by swallowing his dead body and utilizing the powers possessed by this figure. At number 21, we have Lud and Zolon, Dark Souls 2. The lengthy journey that players must undertake in order to reach Lud and Zolon is one of the factors that contributes to this boss battle's reputation as one of the most frustrating in Dark Souls 2. The frigid outskirts is one of the worst sections in the history of Dark Souls, and the fact that you have to face a boss duo who both move at extremely rapid pace makes this encounter nearly unbearable. These two cats carried out the task of eliminating exiles as part of their service to the Ivory King. It is reasonable to suppose that Lud and Zalon met the same old-timely end because they were both subjected to the same level of corruption as their lord. Number 20, we have the Bell Gargoyle from Dark Souls 1. At the beginning of the game, as players are ringing the bells to access Sen's Fortress, they will face off against a dual boss known as the Bell Gargoyles. This monster is quite difficult, as it requires players to maintain control of both entities while being avoided and being boxed in or pushed off perilous boss arena. The legend that explains the Bell Gargoyles is not particularly complicated, yet it is still very interesting. They are magical beings conjured up for the purpose of putting the chosen undead through their paces and determining the extent of their power. The fact that several forms of these foes can be encountered in Anor Londo itself lends credence to the theory that the gods were responsible for their original creation. Number 19. Suralon from Dark Souls 2. Fans of the Dark Souls series will be pleased to know that the Dark Souls 2 Crown of the Old Iron King downloadable content pack features the multitude of hard encounters. The confrontation with Suralon towards the climax of the game is one of these, and it presents its own unique set of challenges. Even while it is possible to anticipate the majority of this boss's attacks, that does not in any way imply that it is an easy foe to defeat. Those players, however, who are successful in dispatching this enemy without taking any damage at all, will bring about a one-of-a-kind death animation in which the boss performs a suicide by hanging. Suralon used to be the Iron King's right-hand man, but he left the service after witnessing his liege succumb to the temptations of heathenism and decided to pursue his own path in life. He was from a land in the Far East and held honor to the more important than anything else. At number 18, the Fume Knight from Dark Souls 2. Fights against the Fume Knight are regarded by many players as being among the most challenging in Dark Souls 2 without being in any way unbalanced. He possesses a wide variety of movements, tells that are difficult to anticipate, and some of them are the most powerful strikes in the game. The Fume Knight, whose previous identity was Rame, and Valstad both had held positions to service of King Vendrick. On the other hand, a disagreement between the two knights resulted in a fight, which Valstad ultimately triumphed in. As a direct result of this, Fendrick accused Raim of being a traitor and expelled him from his realm. When Raim journeyed to the Broom Tower in search of greater strength, he met and became the champion of Nishandra, a child of dark. Broom Tower is located in the middle of the Broom Mountains. Number 17. Sister Fried, Dark Souls 3. It is not hard to understand why Sister Fried should be included in this list. The boss fight against her consists of staggering 3 phases. The sheer duration of this fight can catch most people off guard, despite the fact that the boss fight itself might not be particularly difficult from a purely technical sense. It is going to be a really difficult period for the players because they will have to face both her and Father Ariandel during the course of the battle. Finding opportunities for effective counterattacks can be difficult, but players that are able to do so will be able to take down this monster. Frida, together with the sisters Lilian and Yuria, was responsible for establishing the Sable Church of Londor. The fact that she is an unkindled denotes that she made an attempt to kindle the first flame and elevate herself to the position of Lord of Cinder, but was unsuccessful. After she had entered Ariandel's painted globe, she conned Father Ariandel into using his own blood to put out the fire that, according to legend, was threatening to consume the world if it was able to continue burning unchecked. Number 16. Pontiff Sullivan, Dark Souls 3. In Dark Souls 3, Pontiff Sullivan is among one of the most difficult bosses you'll face. Both the profaned Ultra Greatsword and the Greatsword of Judgment are in his arsenal. Both of his swords are ultra aggressive and difficult to avoid, especially the former. Due to the fact that his strikes have a fair range, players will need to either improve their dodging skills or block indiscriminately in order to locate a good opening against the monster. In the case that this is not accomplished, the Ashen One will finally give in to the overwhelming of Sullivan's blows. Sullivan was born in the painted world that belonged to Ariandel. The fact that he was forced to dwell in this world led him to make the decision that he would rather travel through the worlds that lay beyond this one. After his desire for power had increased, he made the decision to infiltrate the Covenant of the Dark Moon under the pretense of a follower in order to obtain their power before turning his back on the organization and announcing that he will rule as Pontiff. Soon after, he organized the Pontiff Knights to keep order in Irithyll and the Outrider Knights to expand his territory and take control of neighboring territories. Number 15. The Capra Demon from Dark Souls. The fact that the Capra Demon emerges so early on in the first game is the primary contributor to the difficulty of fighting him. The battle will take place in one of the tiniest boss rooms in the history of the whole Soulsborne franchise, so inexperience will not be the only obstacle that players will have to overcome in order to prevail. The limitation of spades make the leaping strikes of the demon significantly more lethal, especially considering that they have a lock-on which is exasperatingly exact. Further complicating matters, 2 agile dogs are waiting on the other side of the fog gate, making it difficult for the player to find any space in which to move or even breathe. The Capra Demon boss is a unique version of the more common Capra Demons that populate the game on a more consistent basis as standard foes. It is thought that the Capra Demon came into existence when the Witch of Isolus used her Lord Soul in an attempt to replicate the first flame because she feared that it was about to go out. She did this out of concern that the flame would go out. At number 14 we have Alana, the Squalid Queen, from Dark Souls 2. Even though it has the greatest Metacritic score, Dark Souls 2 is without a doubt the most polarizing installment in the Dark Souls series. Many fans feel that it is the poorest edition in the trilogy, despite the fact that it has the highest score. Haha. One of the most common criticisms was that From Software's executives seemed to prioritize quantity over quality, which is something that the DLC did an excellent job of rectifying. The bosses that were included in the DLC were some of the most challenging in the game, especially Alana. The Squalid Queen's fight in a manner that is comparable to that of the original game's final boss, Nishandra. However, the Squalid Queen possesses the ability to call upon allies, which is considerably increasing the level of challenge. Alana, the Squalid Queen, is the last boss in the Artorias of the Abyss DLC for Dark Souls. She is a fragment of Mana's Father of the Abyss. Alana married the Sunken King, who was ultimately vanquished in combat by Sir York and his Blood Knights. Sin, the Slumbering Dragon, was awoken as a result, and he proceeded to blanket the entire city in poisonous fog. Alana has relocated her home to be near Sin, where she is currently collecting souls in the anticipation that she will one day exact her revenge. Number 13. Soul of Cinder, Dark Souls 3. The third and final boss encounter in the Dark Souls trilogy more than lived up to expectations. The first part of Soul of Cinder is very dependent on random events, and the boss's attacks will rapidly switch between Mage, Faith, and different melee builds. The second phase of Soul of Cinder is more straightforward. During the second phase, players are taken on a journey down memory lane when Soul of Cinder channels Gwyn, the final boss from the original game, and uses his formidable moveset. The result of the fact that the Soul of Cinder are an amalgamation of everyone who has ever linked the First Flame, including Lord Gwyn, it possesses many of the same powerful actions and powers that they do. It is the responsibility of the Soul of Cinder to serve as the last line of defense against the Ashen One and to protect the flame. At number 12 we have Artorias from Dark Souls. The benchmark that Dark Souls established for many things, including its DLC, was one of those things. Fights against Artorias the Abyss Walker, the knight after whom the DLC is named, quickly rose to prominence as some of the most cherished in the game. This was primarily attributable to Artorias' heartfelt bond with Sif. Artorias is not viewed in high respect for giving players an easy ride though, because the boss has a multitude of devastating strikes that are extremely difficult to predict. Sif is guarding Artorias' grave as the player enters the Wolves boss arena. Artorias was one of the 4 Knights of Lord Gwyn, and is most remembered for being Sif's companion. Artorias was one of the 4 Knights of the Lord Gwyn. Through the use of his ring, Covenant of Artorias, Artorias was able to travel across the Abyss, where he would hunt dark wraiths. Artorias made his way to the Abyss after Ulasil was defeated there, but he was unable to overcome Manus. Artorias offered himself up as sacrifice to protect Sif with his Great Shield, but he was ultimately defeated by the Abyss. As a result, his mind was corrupted, and as a result, he is antagonistic and extremely aggressive towards the chosen undead. At number 11, we have Manus, Father of the Abyss, Dark Souls 1. Anyone who has been following the mythology of the game knows that when they approach Manus' Fog Gate, they are in for a fight that is going to be extremely challenging. This fight will involve Artorias and the boss that beat him. The majority of the monsters in Dark Souls favor either speed or strength, but Manus, Father of the Abyss, mixes the two. This means that he can deplete the player's health bar in a matter of moments while giving them little opportunity to restore themselves. Thankfully, the player has the ability to call upon Sif to assist him throughout the battle. Although the wolf doesn't deal much damage, it is effective at drawing the attention of the boss. Manus was originally a human being, despite the fact that his grotesque look may lead to one believing otherwise. Both Hawkeye Go and Marvelous Chester assert that the people of Ulasil were instructed by a serpent, most likely Koth or Framt, to dig up Manus' grave. They say that this information came from the serpent. This infuriated Manus, and as a result he would eventually build the Abyss, gaining him the reputation of being known as the Father of the Abyss. When the players encounter the monster, his hostile wrath is still present, and it is a key part of the reason why the battle is so difficult. When Manus was finally vanquished, his spirits broke apart into shards, some of which became self-aware like Alana was earlier on. At number 10 we have the Bed of Chaos from Dark Souls. The Bed of Chaos is so easy that it hardly qualifies as a proper boss fight, even while it has a name and a health meter. The fact of the matter is that all it takes to experience its effect is 3 hits. 2 of those hits are used to clear the road by destroying impediments, while the 3rd hit is the one that eliminates the route. Sadly, there are 2 significant qualifiers attached to it. If players are not careful, this boss will one-shot them by swiping them into the pitfall, which will result in an instant death. Additionally, it is perfectly capable of two-shooting the player because of its lengthy limbs. If you die in the Bed of Chaos, you will have to travel through Lost Isolates for an additional 5 minutes before reaching the boss room. It is not only challenging to deal with, but the punishment for returning is probably the most annoying of all of them. In a manner quite similar to which led to the creation of the Capra demons, the Witch of Izalith was attempting to recreate the original flame with her Lord Soul when she created the Bed of Chaos. Fights against this gigantic tree-like creature that was created are some of the most unconventional boss fights in the entirety of the Dark Souls trilogy. At number 9, we have the 4 Kings from Dark Souls. 4 powerful enemies and 4 separate health bars individually, each of the 4 Kings of New Londo Ruins will launch strikes, utilizing both long-range and close-range techniques. These include swift swipes to the chosen undead's legs, as well as homing shots that players can only narrowly evade and cannot stop without taking a significant amount of damage. If adequate action is not taken against them in a timely manner, the 4 Kings will, in point of fact, begin to conspire against you if they are not stopped. The player will now have to cope with both the Kings that they are currently battling and the long-range homing projectiles simultaneously. Four kings of New Londo were formerly humans who were given the responsibility of ruling over New Londo. Lord Gwyn is the one who chose to appoint the four kings, and it was he who bestowed upon them each a piece of a Lord Soul. According to the item description of the Darkwood, the four kings fell prey to the forces of darkness, and their knights evolved into dark wraiths. The city of New Londo was flooded in an effort to bring their danger under control, which resulted in the capture of the four kings as well as the dark wraiths. Number 8. Ornstein and Smo, Dark Souls. In Narrow Londo, the Dragon Slayer and a Giant make up a notorious team known as the Giant and the Dragon Slayer. The one is more nimble and makes use of lightning and quick dashes, while the second is bulky and makes use of big area of effect strikes with a gigantic hammer. No matter which of the two players you choose to eliminate first, the other will automatically gain the power and health of their fallen comrade. The best way to take on this double team is with the assistance of your fellow phantoms, and with adequate preparation. On the other hand, this also has the effect of improving the boss's own health in the process. However, if you want to go there alone, you will have to face one of the most challenging boss fights in the entire series. It is commonly thought that Dragon Slayer Ornstein served as the leader of the four Knights of Gwyn, and was the most trusted knight in Lord Gwyn's service. As for Executioner Smo, he submitted an application to become a member of Gwyn's Knights, but his application was denied on the grounds that, according to the description of his hammer, he ground the bones of his victims into his own feed. At number 7, we have Gwyn from Dark Souls. The ultimate adversary in the first Dark Souls game lives up to his formidable reputation. The character is highly nimble and easily get through defenses while attacking with a fire sword. To make matters worse, he combines his standard strike pattern of 2 to 3 hits with a grab attack. The greatest strategy for players who are unable to stagger him between openings is to parry his attacks. If you miss the parry time by even a frame, you should prepare to take a combo. Gwyn also enjoys tracking down players that can heal themselves. Players that are eliminated from the game have the opportunity to retrace their steps through the kiln of the first flame. After the arrival of fire, Lord Gwyn is one of only 4 beings that have successfully located its Lord Soul. His soul granted him the ability to conjure lightning, which he put to use to vanquish the everlasting dragons to take control of the universe. This marked the beginning of the Age of Fire, during which Gwyn ascended to the throne of Lordran. Gwyn made her way to the kiln of the first flame as the flame began to go out so that he might join it, and make an Age of Fire last longer. At number 6, we have Calamite from Dark Souls. Another brutal monster. The dragon from the DLC realm of Ulasil needs to have its fights disabled using Hawkeye's Gao's bow before it can be defeated. If you don't do it, you should prepare for a boss fight that is almost certainly impossible. Even after it has been destroyed, Calamite will continue to deal significant damage to the player due in large to the high HP it possesses. When the player engages Calamite in battle in a vast arena, this nimble dragon has an unrestricted range of motion and can strike the player regardless of the distance between them. In addition, the ability to stun or otherwise hinder the player adds a new dimension of challenge to the encounter. The Black Dragon Calamite is one of the remaining ancient dragons, and according to the Misfortune Ring, it is known as the Bringer of Calamity. After the Black Dragon Calamite passed away, its skills were utilized to build weapons and armor. At number 5, we have the Ancient Dragon from Dark Souls 2. The Ancient Dragon is one of the most possible monsters in Dark Souls 3, and while there is a solid reason for this, it is not guaranteed to be the most challenging opponent in the game. Even though the Ancient Dragon seems like it's a formidable opponent, it is absolutely possible to acquire the item it drops without having to engage it in combat. Otherwise, players have a chance of surviving the first 15 seconds of the game. If the player is foolish enough to challenge the Ancient Dragon, they will incur the wrath of the most powerful and unbeatable dragon in the series. Its intimidating nature stems from its massive area of effect fire, which can kill a player in a single shot. When he is not spewing fire directly at the player, he will soar into the air and breathe fire all around the arena. If you come too close, there's a good chance you get trampled when he falls. The history of the Ancient Dragon is not nearly as well documented as that of Calamite. It is interesting to note that Nashie refers to the dragon as both a prop and a false deity, while Sweet Shalquar refers to it as a colossal thing with the strength to match its size, or something playing the part at least, hinting that it is not actually a dragon. Number 4, we have Dancer of the Boreal Valley, Dark Souls. The Dancer is the embodiment of the worst nightmare imaginable for the player. This otherwise lovely demon serves as the guardian of the final world in the game, and it will slash and dice its way through any player who dares to challenge it. It is a fool's errand to use a cumbersome weapon against such a nimble adversary. There are many different pattern attacks launch a barrage of blows as the player overwhelmed is them with the damage. Even at a greater distance, the dancer's reflexes are so lightning fast that she can knock an Estus flask right out of the hands of the player. It is strongly suggested that you summon before engaging in this battle. In any case, make sure you are always well armed with the most effective weapons that are available. It is thought that the dancer of the Boreal Valley was an Irithilian who resided in Irithil the Boreal Valley prior to Pontiff Sullivan's conquest of that land. After some time had passed, Sullivan coerced her into becoming a dancer. Eventually, he enlisted her in his company of Outrider Knights, where she would eventually develop into an accomplished combatant. Her combat style is one of the most challenging in Dark Souls 3 due to the fact that she combines elements in both swordplay and graceful dancing moves. At number 3, we have the Nameless King from Dark Souls 3. This battle is divided into two halves. In the beginning, you will duel the Nameless King while he is mounted on a steed. In the second act, our protagonist is weakened despite the fact that he has lost his mount. The Nameless King personifies all that is miserable. He is a tremendously powerful adversary who can strike with lightning, and he is not afraid to crush guards without compensation. Let's add the Stabbing Spear attack to the list of things you should make it a point to avoid at all cost. It is hinted throughout the entirety of Dark Souls 3 that the Nameless King is Gwyn's firstborn child. According to the soul of the Nameless King, the boss was once a dragon-slaying god of war before he sacrificed everything to ally himself with the ancient dragons. At number 2, we have Slave Knight Gale, Dark Souls 3. The last boss of the Ringed City DLC is a lone warrior wielding a massive sword, just like the clashes against Gwyn and those related to him. At first, he lunges forward with a great sword in his hand, acting like a savage animal. Unfortunately, as Phase 2 begins, things take a far more lethal turn in the conflict. To vanquish this formidable monster, you will need to employ the most potent weapons and spells at your disposal. Not only will Gale call down lightning as an attack, but his patterns will also become far more difficult to discern. Even his first form mix-ups or 3 to 4 hits are incredibly challenging to defend against. Players will certainly become exhausted by the time they reach the final iteration of the game due to the constant need to avoid being struck by lightning, sword swings, and, yes, actual Dark Souls. It is widely held that Slave Knight Gale previously called the Painted World home and serves as a kind of parental authority to the painter. He wants the painter to destroy the outdated and decaying painting world as soon as possible so that he can start over with a fresh canvas. When the player first confronts Slave Knight Gale in the arena where the boss is located, Gale makes it very clear that the Ashen One is the only remaining bearer of the Dark Souls' power that is required to paint the new world. This sets the stage for the intense battle that follows. And finally, at number 1, we have Dark Eater Midir from Dark Souls 3. The level of hatred that players have for the Dark Eater Midir cannot be adequately expressed through words alone. This enormous dragon is not scared to one-shot opponents and hit them with wave attacks that cannot be blocked and are nearly impossible to dodge. Its enormous health bar ensures that the fights will last at least 10 minutes, and now on New Game Plus setting it is almost certainly go on for longer. Because of his powerful strikes, Dark Eater Midir makes an attempt to attack his openings with extremely dangerous endeavor. He depends mainly on area of effect attacks such as Fire Breath, Stomps, and Tail Swipes, similar to Ancient Dragon. Dark Eater Midir is the third and final boss in the trilogy of most frustrating dragon boss fights in history. This dragon is not just one of the most difficult bosses in the Soul series, but also one of the most difficult bosses in the history of gaming. Midir, also known as Dark Eater, is a member of the Archdragon family. Midir was given the responsibility of waging war against the Abyss, which was a mission that, due to his immortality, he could perform indefinitely. Midir has been infected by the Abyss over the course of many years of conflict, which has given him the ability to employ the Dark as a weapon in conflict against the players. And those are the 28 hardest boss fights in Dark Souls history. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments. Please subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.